Hello everybody and welcome back to another video here on my channel, and in today's video we are going over all the books that I've read in the month of March, which I feel like wasn't a bad quantity, but the quality of books weren't necessarily the best. Some of them were pretty good. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into today's video. A real quick note, I do have you guys kind of in front of my window, so hopefully you won't hear any noise because the windows are open. It is spring basically. It is 70 something degrees outside. It's beautiful. Now's the time to have the windows open. So just in case if you guys hear a little bit of wind noise, even though I'm inside, it's because of that, and I'm super sorry about that. However, let's start with the first book, or the first couple books that I started at the beginning of March. If you guys had seen a previous reading vlog that I was working on, you might have seen these two books in that video. Technically, I went to the library to look for one specific book, couldn't find the book I was looking for, so instead I kept with the same author, and I decided to make almost like I was revisiting her thrillers because I had in the past enjoyed one thriller from this author and I wasn't big on her romance for the most part. So I hopped into two different books from the same author, from Colleen Hoover technically, and they were both technically thrillers even though they weren't the normal thrillers. I felt like they didn't really have thriller in them until maybe the last 40 or so percent, and also I feel like they were not very thrillerish, if that makes sense. So the first book I did pick up in that reading vlog was actually Layla by Colleen Hoover, and I'm not going to lie, I think after finishing it I enjoyed the story, like the concept. I just don't know if it was really done very well in my personal opinion. I really struggled with this book and I felt like I really didn't like it, especially the male main character, some of the things that he was saying and just how he was reacting. And I understand it more once we got to that final plot twist, why it was the way it was, but because I didn't really like it, I rated it 2.5 stars. It was all because I think about 60% of the book I actually did not like it, to be honest. So I was on the last 40% or so. That's when I felt like it turned around. It was like a 4-star book, and I really considered maybe marking it down to 3 stars, and I was like, okay, if we go in the middle, go for like the 2 stars that I was feeling at the beginning, and then also the 4 stars towards the end, I was like, okay, maybe it's a 3-star, but at the same time I was like, it's not a 3-star book to me. Like, I just am not vibing with this book the way that I would with a 3-star book, so I did rate it just 2.5 stars. And I don't know, the overall concept was good because you have where this couple, they first met at a bed and breakfast, and then something happens with this female, or the girl, and something tragic in a way happens and she ends up dying, and when she comes back to life she just goes through some surgery and stuff, and she just had some brain damage and some hard time, and she never really was the same. And that's how our main character kind of describes her, is ever since this accident she has never been the same. And so he's trying to go back to this bed and breakfast to try and not necessarily rekindle the relationship, but try and get it to where it used to be. And there's some other things that he thought about doing, and then some things that also happen while they're there, and I just feel like for the most part it wasn't really the book for me. I think at the end, I think it was done a lot better after knowing the twist, but I just really could not get by, one, my morals, I could not put them aside, and then two, I just really didn't care much about the characters, and I found the male main character a little bit annoying, actually a lot annoying, and I just really was getting annoyed reading this whole book. And I read a big portion of it on the way down to Florida, so I was sitting in a vehicle for 12 to 14 hours reading this book, and on the way back up. Not necessarily the entire time, but a good portion of that time, or at least intermittently. So it was one of those that I wasn't putting it down and then going back to it days later. I was actively reading it within technically 48 hours in a way. I guess the majority of it within 48 hours because I had started it a couple days before we went down. Then hopping into the next book in that video, I did go ahead and read her newest book called Woman Down. This book I did rate a little bit higher. It was at 3.5 stars, and technically I had the same thing where I just couldn't put my morals aside, and there were some things that were just happening where I was like, I don't really enjoy this. This is very much on like the lust side, the cheating side for one person in particular. And then we got farther into the book and we had some plot twists happen, and I was like, you know what, I can't vibe with this no more. I did like the premise of the book in a way because you have this author who was writing a bunch of books, and one of her books actually had a movie adaptation, and then after that movie there were some critiques or some criticisms, and she just basically laid low for a whole year or so. She wasn't writing the book, she had deadlines that weren't being met, she was in a book slump, or like a writer's slump, writer's block, and then some other things were happening, and I was like, I really actually kind of enjoyed this concept. I know there was one comment that said that Colleen Hoover was basically writing a fanfic about her life, which I thought was a little bit funny, but apparently in the author's note it had been like 3 years since she's apparently produced a book, and this was based off of, I do believe, a novella that she had once written, but I guess she adapted it a little bit differently or rewrote it a little bit and added more information to it and then published it as a book. And for the most part I actually enjoyed this. I liked some things that happened. I mean, if you're not going into the adult content, there were some things that I actually kind of enjoyed because I was like, okay, most of the things I'm seeing are happening, or most of the the things that I think will happen are happening. But then we have some other things, some little twists that I was like, ooh, this is actually kind of good. This is not that bad of a book. So I did rate it 3.5 stars, but I went into it, especially after Layla, going into it and trying to just not have a thought in my mind when reading it. And I feel like that helped me a lot more. And I also wasn't trying to criticize just Colleen. I was just trying to form an opinion on her book in a way, if that makes sense. I'm not saying it's one of my favorites, and honestly, I'm losing hope for trying sometimes to go back to Colleen Hoover because I just really loved Verity, and something about that book made me think that her other thriller books would be really good, and in turn, all of her thriller books so far are just not very thrilling. And now finally, we are getting to the books that I actually have physical books for. The next book that I hopped into was actually Glass Sword. This is book 2 in the Red Queen series, and I actually rated this one 3 stars. I actually enjoyed this a lot. I have no clue what I rated the first one. It might have been like 3.5, maybe 4 stars. I think this was both not as good, but also better than the first book. Like, it had better events, some more, I'm just gonna say, questionable things happening in it. But at the same time, because it is in the first book of the series, I feel like I just had more of that where it wasn't as good. You're not getting an introduction into the series, into the world, into how this whole political system works, everything like that. And also, it's not new to you anymore because you've already read the first book, if that makes sense. I don't really know if that makes sense, but it makes sense to me. However, I think this character, she's supposed to be morally gray, but she's kind of crossing the line from morally gray to just not a good character. There are some decisions that she makes, some things that she says that I'm like, you probably should not have said that. Like, I understand you're supposed to be a morally gray character, but you're starting to be a little past that, a little crazy. But it makes me really excited for the next book, especially how this ended off, because I don't want to say exactly what happened, but there's something that almost leaves you on like a cliffhanger in a way. It's like you get a really good glimpse into how the next book or the next 2 books are gonna go, and it's just gonna be chaos. That's all I can think of. It's just gonna be straight chaos, and I don't know if I'm necessarily ready for it. Like, I am ready to read the rest of the books and finish out the series, but at the same time, it's like, am I prepared for what potentially is going to happen? Because what I want to happen doesn't seem like it's gonna work out, and if it does, it's definitely gonna have to be in the last book, because I don't think in the next book is probably only 300 to 400 pages. I don't think we're gonna get where I want to be exactly in that book, unless if it's gonna feel very rushed. So I'm gonna assume maybe by the last book we'll get exactly where I want. Next, we hopped into another book that continues the series, and this book in particular was one that at first I wasn't excited to hop into it until I seen some people talk to me on Fable, and they said that book 2 was so much better than book 1. Book 1 was like an introduction to the world. You get to learn a bunch of stuff, and then in this book you get more chaos, more just the story, the plot, and I feel like that was definitely true because I rated the first book 3 stars, and this book I actually rated 3.5 stars, and this is none other than The Wicked King. I'm sure you guys have heard me talk about this book a few times here on my channel, or not necessarily this book, but the series. I definitely think that this was better than the first one, and there were some things about this book, or some times while reading it, that I was like, oh, it's just like the first book. Like, I'm not really that invested. I'm a little bit bored. I feel like it's a little slow, and then some other things were happening, and I'm not gonna lie, the ending of this book made up for any of those feelings that I had during probably the first like 70% of this book. I'm not gonna lie, that ending, I was so excited about it, or so I just had so much emotion that I wanted to hop into the final book in this trilogy and just see what the resolution was, because I was not expecting that, and I felt like it was a good little plot twist where when I'm not really expecting something to turn out the way it is, because I'm always predicting things, I feel like it's so much better in a book, and I definitely have a lot more hope for the final book of this trilogy. I just don't also think I'm gonna read any other books in this world. I don't think I'm gonna go out of my way to buy any of those books. I think I'm just gonna leave it at this trilogy, but I definitely think if you did not like the first one, or if you're kind of like me where you were a little bit indifferent, it wasn't that you hated it and it wasn't that you really liked it, maybe go ahead, if you haven't tried this book, try going into it and seeing if you do like it, and if it doesn't pick up by the end of this book, and if you're not really invested to go into the third, maybe don't go into it, maybe just cut your losses there. But for me, I was like, okay, we're gonna give book 3 a chance, because I gave this book a chance, and at first I was a little worried because it was turning out like book 1, but then towards the end, like I said, it got so much better. So I'm definitely glad I gave it a chance, and definitely not my favorite, because to me it's YA. I mean, I think technically it is YA, and my big problem is, for me, when I think of YA, I'm thinking middle school to high school for the most part. I feel like around 18 to 21 is where new adults should come in, and maybe this is like middle school for sure, but there's some content in here that I feel like is pushing YA, like it shouldn't be in a YA book. That's my little rant about that. That's like the biggest thing that I feel like, besides like some slow moments, that I really had to complain about. And I noticed that a lot of authors, or just specific authors, do this while trying to write within the YA genre, if that makes sense. So not to kind of push my morals a little bit into this video, but at the same time, this is my channel, so it kind of makes sense, and it's how I felt about the book. And next we hop into yet again another series. I'm trying to finish some of my series, and also this is book number 3 from a series, and I actually rated Percy Jackson and the Titan's Curse 4 stars. I feel like this book is such a good turning point in the Percy Jackson series. It was definitely YA before, but it's almost very similar to Harry Potter, and I did kind of see this before on one of the reviews, so I'm definitely going to talk about it. But there is a spot in Harry Potter, we have the Sorcerer's Stone and the Chamber of Secrets. That's very much like little kid, or not little kid, but like YA. And then you have, I feel like for me, technically in the movies, it's the Prisoner of Azkaban, and maybe I'm just a little biased, so I think a little bit of Prisoner of Azkaban is where you start to get that maturity turning point, but more so in the books, it's definitely the Goblet of Fire. That is like the strict, like we are no longer just having a little fantasy, YA fantasy. It is still YA, but it's like you mature and you grow up with Harry, and there's some things that happen that aren't necessarily tailored just to YA. It's more of just like a little bit of YA, but kind of just fantasy as you get on through the books. And I feel like we're getting to that turning point, potentially at least, with this book specifically. This is one of those that you have something that happens and some tragic things in a way that kind of happen. It is definitely more YA than I feel like Harry Potter was, but you get things, and now we're kind of watching as Percy is growing up, and he's getting towards his 16th birthday, and some things are going on regarding prophecies, and then some other things are happening, and more so it's like the potential of death. You have more of a potential of dying in this book on 4 than you did in the first 2 books, and I'm very excited for the next couple books. I definitely want to eventually get these books in hardcovers when I go to Half Price Books, but for right now I'm just super excited to get through the rest of the series and end this out and see exactly how it is. And I do believe potentially this book, because it was hinting at something, but more so the next book, we're gonna get more of like a romance or subplot of romance. I feel like it's kind of gonna be, I don't want to spoil anything, but kind of like Harry Potter, where you get a little bit of romance, if that makes sense. So I'm kind of excited about that because I have my suspicions on who exactly, but it's between 2 different girls with Percy, and I'm kind of surprised because one's like a forbidden, like you shouldn't, and one is like his friend and has been his friend since the beginning. So I don't know, I really don't know, but I'm very excited to hop into the next couple of books and finish this series. And then technically I did start this book a while ago, never got around to it, even though I read like, I don't know, 10 or so pages of it, and then finally I decided to come back to it and finish it. And this book in particular was one that originally when I read the first one, I said I was never gonna hop into the second one because I just felt like after reading the reviews it was kind of pointless. Apparently it was just like the first book, yada yada yada. I listened to the reviews when maybe I should have just formed an opinion based off of me reading it myself. And then not too many months ago, my husband and I went out on like a little date again. We watched the first book as a movie in theaters, and I got really excited because of how that left off, and I wanted to go into this book. So I ended up finding this one and also the third one, or the next one in the series, at my local library for sale, and I decided to pick both of them up this month. And it is actually The Housemaid's Secret by Freida McFadden. As you guys know, The Housemaid just came out not too many months ago, or last month I do believe, and I really love The Housemaid. I think I've rated that one either 4.5 stars or maybe it was a 5-star read. It might have been just 4.5 stars, but the movie was also, I felt like, really good. They did a great job adapting that movie or that book into a movie, and I feel like they followed the book more than going astray from the book. And then this one in particular, we are still following the same character, but she's kind of navigating in a way being a house cleaner and some other things, but at the same time it's like you get where she's trying to come away from being the housemaid originally in the first book, and she's trying to have a different life, and then something happens, and some people were saying she got herself into this position. I mean, yes, you could say that. However, I was not trying to compare this book so much to The Housemaid, even though it was a part of the same series. It's also involving the same character. I was just going into it like it was a whole brand new book. Also, it helps that I've read The Housemaid I think like 3 years ago or 2 years ago, so it had been a long while, and I feel like it's very kind of away from my brain besides what the movie is. But hopping into this, I was still invested, just like I feel like I always am with Freida McFadden books, and I really like the plot of this. I will say, however, though, we got like, let's just say 130 pages into it, and I was like, how are we wrapping this up? There is something that's going to happen. And I was sitting there racking my brain, and I was like, what if we have this person who's supposed to be bad, and maybe this person who's supposed to be good but is actually bad, and we have more than just one character who's bad? And I was like, you know what, I feel like that's a theory I could get behind, and I wasn't necessarily wrong, but I also wasn't fully right, and there were some things that were happening, and up until the very end I was like, oh, I actually really liked this. This was very interesting and I liked how it played out. I liked some of the plot twists. It did have a lot more parts than I felt like the Housemaid had, and I felt like there were some slow moments, some things leading up to the actual parts, but once we really got into that, I was like, oh, we're really gonna be rolling through this book now, and that is basically what happened. I rated this book 4.5 stars, and I definitely recommend so far going into it. Just try not to go into it completely comparing it to the Housemaid. I'd go into it with like a fresh mind, fresh slate. Maybe give yourself a couple months after reading the Housemaid and then go into it. But also don't look at the reviews, because I feel like the reviews kind of ruin how you kind of think about the book, either before you go into it or as you're already in it. Definitely look at the reviews after you've read it and have an opinion already based off of it, or at least formed in a way. I actually really enjoyed this, and for somebody who never wanted to go into it because of the reviews, are basically proof that maybe you should read it first and not just judge it off of everybody else's opinion. At least for me. And now we are going over my final book for the month of March. I just finished this book actually today, not too long ago, right before doing this video. So it is a very short book, but it's one that I really wanted to finish, and we are on the final day of March, so it's perfect. I'm back with another Western book, another Louis L'Amour, and this is actually The Quick and the Dead, and it's only 153 pages. It's very short. I found this at the same time with The Housemaid's Secret and The Housemaid is Watching. I found this book at my local library, and I debated not getting it, but they had a sale where you fill a whole bag for $1, and so I was like, just throw it in. Might as well just throw it in. I'm paying $1 for all these books. Might as well. So I hopped into this because I knew I was going to want to read it anyways, and I do want to get a hardback cover or a hardback edition for this, so it's full size. It's not like this. It's not as stiff, and also because it matches my other book from him. I really like little storyline. I feel like it was kind of fast paced, and just there's a lot going on within 153 pages, but it's also only 153 pages, so you only get so much. But I think that for the length of it, he does a really good job at putting so much into each page. There isn't really fluff. He just goes from one thing that happens to the next, and he just continues it. And it's basically about a small family, a husband and wife with their son, and their son is older, I think like a teenager, 10, 12, 14 maybe, but they are on their way from the east and going all the way to the west side of the country, and they have this wagon that is loaded down with a bunch of furniture, and it's super heavy, and it's like heirlooms and things like that, and they have 4 mules on the front and 2 actual just horses, but they're not attached to the wagon. So they meet this guy very quickly, I think like 5 pages into the book. They meet this guy and he's like, hey, by the way, your wagon is too heavy and somebody already took your 2 horses, and by the time you get to this location, your 4 mules, at least a couple of them are gonna die, and then because your wagon's so heavy, you're not gonna get where you're trying to go. Like, you're too far out. This band of misfits, or this gang, basically stealing those 2 horses, and then because they, I don't want to say what kind of happens, but then they kind of want to seek revenge on this family and some other people and that guy, and there's some other things that happen. And for the most part, we are just following this family, trying to get to their home, or at least a home that they end up finding and picking out for themselves, trying to avoid Indians, trying not to get scalped, trying to learn how to be on this side of the country and how to live in the wilderness, and also trying to avoid this gang. And it is so interesting and so action-packed for just being 153 pages, and I really recommend any of his books so far. I've read 2 of them. This is the other book that I read from him. It is The Cherokee's Trail. I might have honestly rated this 3 stars, and this book in particular I rated 3 stars, but I love his covers. I love how he writes his protagonist, and also in the other one I really liked how he wrote the female. I feel like he does really great at writing the females for this time period, because you get a little bit of that historic like trueness to it, but you also have more of, like in the last one, it's more defiant type female, and then in this one she's unsure, she's scared, but at the same time she's trying to defend her family, so she might kill or at least hurt somebody over it. And I find this very interesting, and I love his book so much. So I'm super happy that I got to finish this today, and I'm super happy that I did find this, and now I'm gonna be on the lookout for a hardcover. Minus 2 books, here are the 7 books that I read for the month of March. I feel like we didn't do too bad for quantity. Like I said, the quality wasn't the best. I'm still on the lookout for a 5-star read. We did have a 4.5. I feel like my 3 stars were pretty decent, but I'm looking, I'm searching for a 5-star. I think that's why I feel like the quality isn't there necessarily, even though these were great reads. A lot of them were great reads. With that being out of the way, let's go ahead and get into some monthly statistics. First off, we're gonna start with the good old physical TBR. I have a problem. I know it. I just feel like it's so hard when I'm going places like the thrift store or the library where they have sales. It's so hard not to peruse, not to just like look and just not grab. It's really hard. Sometimes I do really well, and then other days it's like I'll buy, like I did for the $1 fill a bag. I bought like 4 books that day. So it's really bad, because last time I had on my physical TBR, I was down to 74 books. But because I bought a couple books, even though I read, technically I guess it's just 5 books from my physical TBR, I am now up 1 book and I'm at 75 on my physical TBR list. But that's okay. I have made it to where now I'm not going to the library anymore because 2 months in a row I've read 2 books from the library. That's 4 books I could have tackled on my physical TBR. And that would have put me down at 71 books. Even with buying all the books, it would have probably put me down a lot more. So I have made it to where until I get to a certain amount, I'm not allowed to pick up a book from the library, which is fine because I feel like I have plenty of books I can tackle. For my 26 and 26, we did tackle 1 book on that list, and it was The Wicked King. That brought us from 4 out of 26 accomplished to 5 out of 26, which was also 19%. I've crossed off a lot of books on my series, but none of them have completed my series tracker just yet, or another one. For the alphabet challenge, we did add a couple books to this list. Not very many because we are starting to fill up the more common letters. I did add Glass Sword for the letter G and also Woman Down for the letter W, but that was it. And actually, we do have a bingo finally. I decided to go ahead and cross it off because it was my perfect time. First, I guess let me tell you which books I actually got for this month added to the bingo. We had a book rated 4 stars or higher on Goodreads with a 4.37 star rating was Percy Jackson and the Titan's Curse. We had a fantasy crossed off for Glass Sword, The Wicked King for a 3-word title, Layla for a thriller, and finally Woman Down for under 400 pages. Going straight down in the middle of my bingo is my bingo, and we have first over 600 pages being Under the Dome, a book rated 4 stars or higher on Goodreads being The Titan's Curse, a free space or a book on my TBR, which I put as The Murder at the Vicarage, thriller being Layla, and finally, like I said, Woman Down for a book under 400 pages. On my 26 reading challenge, I only crossed off one other one of those, and it was actually blue on the cover being Glass Sword. I had a couple opportunities probably to cross off some more, like The Housemaid's Secret. I did consider for a currently popular right now because the movie just came out, so there's been a lot of talk about book 2 and potentially a making of a movie for book 2, but I did not cross that off because I feel like it just wasn't really in the moment. I feel like the popularity or the hype for it just isn't there as much. I have officially accomplished 17 books this year in total so far, and my first book goal, because I always do too, is at 35, and then my next one's at 65. So we are basically halfway there to my first book goal. My top genre this month, I think last month it was mystery and YA fantasy. Well, YA fantasy took the lead. Instead of 3 books, we have now officially 6 books with that genre, so it is the top genre that I have read this year. And then this month I have read 7 books with a total of 2,143 pages. I had 0 5 stars. However, my favorite book of the month would have to be The Housemaid's Secret. And there you have it. That is everything I have for this month's wrap up. Hope you guys all enjoyed this video. If you're curious about next month's TBR, I already have that video posted. Go ahead, click back and watch that video. And also stay tuned for this coming month because I know for sure I have a Read It or Unhaul It that I definitely want to get to later this month. And then I have a reading vlog that I'm going to be making for a bunch of thrillers that will also be kind of tackling some books off my 26 and 26. So I'm super excited about those videos, and I hope to see you in another video here on my channel. And as always, God bless.